In the span of 17 seconds, an ordinary Tuesday morning transformed into the kind of day that splits lives into before and after. While most people were checking their phones or grabbing coffee, Maria Santos was about to prove that heroes don't wear capes or carry badges. They wear scrubs, have calloused hands from double shifts, and sometimes they pick up abandoned weapons not to hurt but to save lives. This isn't a story about someone who was trained for combat or prepared for crisis. This is about a 34-year-old hospital cleaner who had never held a gun in her life, who spoke broken English, and who everyone overlooked until the moment when overlooking her would have cost dozens of innocent lives. What happened next would be replayed on security cameras, analyzed by experts, and remembered by survivors for the rest of their lives. But before we get to that moment of raw courage, we need to understand who Maria Santos really was and why nobody saw her coming. Maria Santos had been invisible her entire life, and she preferred it that way. At 5'2" with graying hair always pulled back in a simple ponytail, she moved through the halls of St. Chancellor, Mary's medical center, like a ghost. Patients didn't notice her mopping floors at 5 a.m. Doctors stepped around her without looking up from their phones. Nurses occasionally nodded, but most treated her like part of the furniture. She had worked the early morning shift for 8 years, arriving when the hospital was still quiet, and leaving before the chaos of the day shift began. Her routine never changed. Clock in at 4:30 a.m. sharp, grab her supplies from the janitor's closet on the 3rd floor, and begin her methodical journey through the building. Emergency room first, then surgical floors, then pediatrics, and finally the administrative offices on the ground floor. Maria didn't mind being invisible. She had learned long ago that being noticed often meant trouble. Growing up in El Salvador during the Civil War, she had watched her neighbors disappear for asking too many questions or standing out too much. When she arrived in Texas 15 years ago with her 2 young children and nothing else, invisibility had kept them safe while she worked. 3 jobs to keep food on the table. Her English was functional but heavily accented, which made some people assume she was stupid. Maria let them think that. It was easier than explaining that she had been a teacher back home, that she could discuss literature and mathematics in Spanish better than most of her supervisors could in English. Her hands, now rough from years of cleaning chemicals and hard work, had once held lesson plans and graded papers. But St. Mary's Medical Center had become her sanctuary. The night shift suited her perfectly. She could work in peace, listening to her small radio playing soft music, and take pride in leaving each room spotless. The hospital never slept, but during her hours, it rested quietly. She knew every corner of the building, every squeaky floorboard, every door that didn't close properly. The other cleaning staff respected her. She trained the new hires, showing them which supervisors to avoid and which nurses would slip them leftover food from the break room. Maria had a reputation for being thorough and reliable. In 8 years, she had never called in sick, never been late, never caused any problems. Her supervisor, Janet Morrison, barely knew her name despite working together for 3 years. Janet was a loud woman who managed the housekeeping department like a drill sergeant, barking orders and complaining about budget cuts. She saw Maria as just another immigrant worker, dependable but unremarkable. During their monthly meetings, Janet would flip through Maria's performance reviews without really reading them, stamp satisfactory on the forms, and move on to the next employee. Dr. Harrison Webb had walked past Maria thousands of times without seeing her. As the hospital's chief of emergency medicine, he was always rushing between trauma rooms and surgery consultations. If pressed, he might have recognized her face, but he couldn't have told you her name or anything about her. She was part of the hospital's background noise, like the humming of machines or the squeak of wheels on linoleum. Even the security guards, who were trained to notice everyone, treated Maria like she was part of the building. She had been there so long, arriving so early and working so quietly, that they had stopped really seeing her. Tom Bradley, the morning security supervisor, would nod at her when he made his rounds, but their conversations never went beyond good morning and have a nice day. Maria's life outside the hospital was equally invisible to her co-workers. None of them knew that she lived in a small apartment with her teenage daughter Carmen and her elderly mother, who had moved to Texas 2 years earlier. They didn't know that Carmen was valedictorian of her senior class, planning to attend college on a full scholarship. They didn't know that Maria's son Diego had joined the army and was serving overseas, or that she sent him care packages every month filled with homemade cookies and letters written in careful Spanish. Her co-workers didn't know that Maria spent her Sundays at St. Augustine Catholic Church, where she helped organize food drives and taught English classes to new immigrants. They didn't know that she had saved enough money to buy a small house, or that she was taking online courses to become a certified medical interpreter. They saw her as someone without ambition, stuck in a dead-end job, when in reality she was methodically building a better life for her family. The morning of March 15th started like any other. Maria arrived at 4:25 a.m., 5 minutes early, as always. She parked her 15-year-old Honda Civic in the employee lot, grabbed her lunch from the passenger seat, and walked through the employee entrance using her keycard. The security desk was empty. Tom wouldn't arrive until 6 a.m. for the shift change. She stopped by the break room to put her lunch in the refrigerator and fill her water bottle. The coffee machine was brewing, filling the room with the rich smell that would later draw the day shift nurses. Maria preferred tea, which she made with hot water from the small kettle she kept in her supply closet. The elevator to the third floor was unusually slow that morning. Maria waited patiently, checking her phone for any messages from Carmen, who was probably still sleeping before school. The elevator finally arrived with a soft ding, and she rode up to collect her supplies. Her cart was exactly where she had left it the day before, properly stocked and organized. Maria took pride in maintaining her equipment. The mop was clean, the cleaning solutions were arranged in order of use, and her radio was tucked securely in the small basket she had attached to the handle. She had bought the radio with her own money after growing tired of working in complete silence. As she began her descent to the emergency room, Maria thought about Carmen's college applications. Her daughter had been accepted to 3 universities and was still waiting to hear from 2 more. The scholarship money would cover tuition, but there would still be expenses for books and housing. Maria had been picking up extra shifts when possible, saving every dollar she could. The emergency room was quieter than usual for a Tuesday morning. Only 2 patients waited in the lobby, and both appeared to be sleeping. Maria began her routine, starting with the bathrooms and working her way through the treatment rooms. She moved efficiently but thoroughly, ensuring that each surface was properly disinfected. Room 3 had been used for a trauma case earlier, and there were still traces of blood on the floor despite the initial cleaning by the night staff. Maria didn't mind the difficult cleanups. She understood that someone's life had been fought for in this room, and she treated it with the respect it deserved. As she worked, Maria listened to her radio playing softly. A Spanish-language station was broadcasting the morning news, mixing stories about local politics with updates on traffic conditions. She half listened while concentrating on her work, years of practice allowing her to divide her attention effectively. The morning progressed normally through the surgical floors. Maria encountered a few early-arriving nurses preparing for their shifts, exchanging brief pleasantries in the hallways. Dr. Martinez, one of the few doctors who always greeted her by name, passed by carrying 2 cups of coffee and wished her a good morning in Spanish. It was 7:23 a.m. when Maria reached the pediatric ward. This was always her favorite part of the day. The children's section had colorful decorations and a slightly different atmosphere than the rest of the hospital. Even when she couldn't see the young patients, knowing they were nearby made her work feel more meaningful. She was mopping the hallway outside the playroom when she first noticed something was wrong. The elevator at the far end of the hall had opened, and instead of medical personnel or visitors, a man in dark clothing emerged. He moved differently than everyone else in the hospital, with a rigid tension that made Maria pause in her work. The man looked around the hallway carefully, and Maria instinctively stepped back into the doorway of the supply closet. Something about his behavior triggered an alarm in her mind that she couldn't quite identify. He wasn't dressed like a doctor or a visitor, and he seemed too young to be a patient's parent. From her partially hidden position, Maria watched as the man walked purposefully toward the nurse's station. His hands were in his pockets, and he kept looking over his shoulder. The morning nurse, Sarah Kim, was sitting at the desk reviewing charts, unaware of his approach. Maria's heart began to beat faster. Every instinct developed during years of surviving in dangerous situations told her that something was very wrong. The man's posture, his furtive movements, the way he kept his hands hidden, it all pointed to trouble. She was still trying to decide whether to step forward or retreat further when the man reached the nurse's station. What happened next would haunt Maria's dreams for months to come. The man pulled something from his jacket, not a gun, but something equally terrifying in a hospital setting. It was a large knife, and he was pointing it directly at Sarah Kim. Sarah looked up from her charts and froze. Her mouth opened as if to scream, but no sound came out. The man said something Maria couldn't hear from her distance, but his threatening posture made his intentions clear. He was demanding something from the nurse, and he was prepared to hurt her to get it. Maria's first instinct was to run. Every survival mechanism she had developed over the years screamed at her to get away, to find help, to avoid becoming another victim. But as she looked at Sarah Kim's terrified face, something else stirred inside her. This young nurse had always been kind to her, had asked about Carmen's school progress, had treated her like a human being rather than invisible help. The pediatric ward was essentially empty at this early hour. The children were still sleeping, and there wouldn't be another nurse on duty for another 20 minutes. If Maria ran to get help, Sarah would be alone with an armed man for far too long. The security desk was 3 floors down and wouldn't be staffed for another half hour. Maria's hands tightened on her mop handle as she watched the man lean closer to Sarah, his knife glinting under the fluorescent lights. The nurse was reaching slowly toward her desk, probably trying to access the emergency button, but the man grabbed her wrist and shook his head violently. It was then that Maria noticed something else that changed everything. On the floor beside the elevator, partially hidden behind a medical cart, was something that didn't belong in a hospital hallway. It was dark metal, angular, unmistakably dangerous, even from a distance. A rifle. The realization hit Maria like a physical blow. This wasn't just a robbery or a desperate drug addict looking for medications. The knife was just backup. The man had come to the hospital armed with a rifle, and for reasons she couldn't understand, he had put it down while confronting the nurse. Maria's mind raced through possibilities. Maybe the rifle had jammed. Maybe he had run out of ammunition. Maybe he was saving it for something bigger and more terrible. Whatever the reason, the weapon was currently 15 feet away from him and much closer to where Maria stood hidden. She had never touched a gun in her life. She didn't know how they worked, how to tell if they were loaded, or even how to hold one properly. But she knew that a man who brought a rifle to a hospital had plans that went far beyond threatening one nurse. The pediatric ward housed 42 children, ranging in age from newborns to teenagers. The general hospital beyond had hundreds of patients, doctors, nurses, and visitors who would be arriving for the day shift in less than an hour. If this man retrieved his rifle, the morning news would carry a very different story. Maria looked at the abandoned weapon, then at Sarah Kim's terrified face, then at the closed doors behind which sick children were sleeping peacefully. In that moment, she made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She set down her mop, stepped out of the doorway, and began walking toward the rifle. Her hands were shaking, her heart was pounding so hard she was sure everyone in the building could hear it. But Maria Santos, the invisible woman who nobody ever noticed, was about to make sure that everyone would remember this day for all the right reasons. Maria's first steps toward the rifle felt like walking through thick water. Her legs trembled with each movement, but she forced herself to keep going. The man at the nurse's station was still focused on Sarah Kim, his back turned to Maria's approach. The knife in his hand caught the light as he gestured aggressively, demanding something that Sarah apparently couldn't or wouldn't give him. As Maria got closer to the weapon, she could see it more clearly. It was black with a long barrel and what looked like a curved magazine attached to the bottom. She had seen similar weapons in movies and news reports, but never imagined she would be this close to one in real life. The rifle was lying on its side behind the medical cart, partially concealed but easily accessible to anyone who knew where to look. Her cleaning cart was still several feet away, blocking her direct path. Maria knew that moving it would make noise and potentially alert the man to her presence. Instead, she crouched down and began to crawl, using the medical equipment and furniture as cover. The hospital's early morning quiet worked in her favor. Every small sound seemed amplified, but there was no background noise to mask her movements if she made a mistake. The linoleum floor was cold against her knees as she moved forward, inch by inch. Her radio, still clipped to a uniform, was playing softly, and she reached up to turn the volume down even further. The Spanish music that had been comforting moments earlier now seemed dangerously loud. From her low position, Maria could hear fragments of the conversation at the nurse's station. The man's voice was harsh and urgent, though she couldn't make out all the words. He seemed to be demanding access to something. Maybe drugs. Maybe computer records. Maybe just keys to other parts of the hospital. Sarah's responses were barely whispers, punctuated by what sounded like quiet crying. Maria reached the medical cart and paused to catch her breath. Her heart was beating so fast that she worried it might be audible. She had never been in a situation like this, had never imagined that her peaceful morning routine could turn into something from a nightmare, but there was no time for fear paralysis. The rifle was just a few feet away, and every second that passed increased the danger to everyone in the hospital. She peered around the cart and confirmed that the man was still occupied with the nurse. His posture had become more aggressive, and he was leaning over the desk. The knife pointed directly at Sarah's chest. Whatever he wanted, his patience was clearly running out. Maria took a deep breath and reached for the rifle. The moment her fingers touched the cold metal, every instinct screamed at her to let go and run. The weapon was heavier than she had expected. and the unfamiliar weight made her hands shake even more. She had no idea how to determine if it was loaded, how to operate the safety, or even how to hold it properly without accidentally firing it. But Maria had spent her entire adult life learning skills she never expected to need. When she arrived in America, she had learned to drive by practicing in empty parking lots at night. When her first job required using a computer, she had taught herself by staying late and experimenting with the software. When Carmen needed help with algebra, Maria had relearned mathematics from library books. This was just another impossible task that she would have to figure out as she went. She lifted the rifle carefully, trying to keep the barrel pointed away from herself and anyone else. The weapon felt awkward in her hands, but she managed to get a grip on it without dropping it. Now came the hardest part. She had to get close enough to the man to make a difference, and she had to do it without being noticed until it was too late for him to react. Maria began to move around the cart, staying low and using the furniture for cover. The man was about 20 feet away, still focused entirely on Sarah Kim. The nurse had stopped responding to his demands and was simply staring at the knife with the wide-eyed terror of someone who knew they were about to die. As Maria crept closer, she began to understand fragments of the man's demands. He wanted Sarah to unlock the medication storage room. He wanted access to the computer system. But there was something else, something that made Maria's blood run cold. He kept mentioning them and they, referring to other people, other targets. This wasn't a lone wolf looking for drugs. This was part of something bigger. The realization hit her with crushing force. The rifle wasn't abandoned by accident. The man had put it down temporarily because he needed both hands free to force Sarah to help him. Once he had what he needed from her, he would retrieve the weapon and continue with whatever larger plan had brought him to the hospital. Maria thought about the children sleeping behind the closed doors around her. She thought about the nurses who would be arriving soon for the morning shift, walking into a trap they couldn't imagine. She thought about Dr. Martinez with his 2 cups of coffee, and even about Janet Morrison with her loud voice and demanding attitude. None of them deserved what this man was planning. She was close enough now to hear every word clearly. The man was getting increasingly agitated with Sarah's lack of cooperation. He kept glancing at his watch and muttering about being late for something. Whatever schedule he was following, Sarah's resistance was putting him behind, and his frustration was escalating toward violence. "Last chance," he hissed at the nurse, pressing the knife closer to her throat. "Give me the codes or I'll cut you right here and find someone else who's more cooperative." Sarah Kim was 26 years old, recently married, with a baby at home. Maria had seen pictures of the child, taped to Sarah's computer monitor. The young nurse was sobbing now, terror overwhelming her ability to think clearly. Even if she wanted to comply with the man's demands, she was too frightened to function. Maria was close enough to touch the man if she stretched out her arm. The rifle felt impossibly heavy in her hands, but she managed to raise it and point the barrel in his general direction. She had no idea if the weapon was loaded, no idea if there was a bullet in the chamber, no idea if she could actually pull the trigger if necessary, but she knew that she couldn't. Watch Sarah Kim die when she had the power to prevent it. "Stop," Maria said in English, her voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't hear her the first time. He was too focused on his threats to notice the quiet voice behind him. Maria cleared her throat and tried again, louder this time. "Stop, move away from her." This time he heard her. The man turned around slowly, and Maria found herself looking into the eyes of someone who had already decided that other people's lives meant nothing to him. He was younger than she had expected, maybe in his early 20s, with the kind of empty stare that she had seen before in people who had given up their humanity. When he saw Maria pointing the rifle at him, his first reaction was not fear but amusement. He looked at the middle-aged cleaning woman in her uniform, shaking hands, barely able to hold the weapon steady, and he actually smiled. "Lady, do you even know how to use that thing?" he asked, his voice filled with contempt. "You probably don't even know if it's loaded." He was right, and Maria knew it. She had no idea what she was doing with the rifle, no idea if it would fire when she pulled the trigger, no idea if she had the courage to actually shoot another human being, even to save lives. But she also knew that showing weakness now would get both her and Sarah killed. "Move away from the nurse," she repeated, trying to keep her voice steady. "Put down the knife and step back." The man looked at her for a long moment, clearly calculating his options. He could probably overpower her before she figured out how to fire the rifle. He could throw the knife and hope to disable her before she could react. Or he could simply call her bluff and continue with his original plan. But something in Maria's eyes must have convinced him that she was more dangerous than she appeared. Maybe it was the desperation of a mother protecting other people's children. Maybe it was the quiet determination that had carried her through 15 years of struggle in a foreign country. Whatever he saw there made him reconsider his assessment of the situation. "You don't know what you're getting into, lady," he said, but he took a small step back from the nurse's station. "This is bigger than you think. I'm not alone here." The words sent a chill down Maria's spine, but she didn't let it show in her expression. She had suspected that this was part of a larger plan, and his confirmation made the stakes even higher. But it also meant that Sarah Kim wasn't the only person in immediate danger. "How many?" Maria asked, surprising herself with the steadiness of her own voice. "How many others?" The man's smile widened. "Enough," he said, "and they're already in position. You can't stop what's coming." Maria's mind raced. If there were other attackers already inside the hospital, then stopping this one man wasn't enough. She needed to get information, needed to find out where the others were and what they were planning. But first, she had to secure this immediate threat. "Sarah," she said without taking her eyes off the man, "can you reach the emergency alarm?" The nurse was still frozen in terror, but Maria's calm voice seemed to break through her panic. Sarah nodded slightly and began to move her hand slowly toward the emergency button under her desk. "Don't even think about it," the man snarled, raising his knife again. "You hit that button and I'll kill her before security gets here." Maria had to make a choice. She could try to negotiate, try to keep the situation stable until help arrived. But if there were other attackers in the hospital, time was not on their side. Every minute that passed gave the others more opportunity to carry out their plan. She thought about Carmen sleeping safely at home, about Diego serving overseas, about all the families who trusted that the hospital was a place of healing and safety. She thought about the 42 children in the pediatric ward, and the hundreds of other innocent people who had no idea that their lives hung in the balance. Maria Santos had been invisible her entire life, but she wasn't invisible anymore. In this moment, she was the only thing standing between a madman and the people she had spent 8 years quietly protecting by keeping their environment clean and safe. The rifle was still shaking in her hands, but her resolve had steadied. She didn't know if she could actually shoot someone, but she knew she would find out if he moved towards Sarah Kim again. "Tell me where the others are," she said, her voice carrying an authority that surprised everyone in the room, including herself. "Tell me what they're planning, and maybe we can figure out a way for everyone to walk away from this alive." The man studied her face for a long moment, and Maria could see him recalculating his assessment of the situation. The invisible cleaning woman was no longer invisible, and she was no longer harmless. What he decided to do next would determine whether Maria Santos remained a hospital employee or became something much more dangerous. A woman with nothing left to lose and the weapon to back up her determination.
The silence stretched between them like a tightrope, with 3 lives balanced precariously on its thin edge.
Maria could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, but she forced herself to maintain eye contact with the man who held Sarah Kim's life in his hands.
Every instinct told her to look away, to submit, to become invisible again. But visibility was the only weapon she had now. The man's smile had faded, replaced by a calculating stare that reminded Maria of the wild dogs that used to roam her neighborhood in El Salvador. Desperate, unpredictable, and willing to attack when cornered. She had learned to survive those dogs by never showing fear, never backing down, never giving them reason to think she was easy prey. "You want to know about the others?" he said finally, his voice taking on a mocking tone. "Fine. There are 3 more, and they're already in position. Emergency room, surgical wing, and the main lobby. In exactly..." He glanced at his watch. 12 minutes. They're going to start making noise. Big noise, the kind that brings every cop in the city running. Maria's blood ran cold. A coordinated attack on 4 different sections of the hospital. Time to maximize chaos and casualties. While police and emergency responders focused on the obvious threats, this man would have been free to work his way through the pediatric ward and the upper floors where the most vulnerable patients were housed.
"But that plan's shot to hell now, isn't it?" the man continued, his anger beginning to show through his false calm. "Thanks to some cleaning lady who doesn't know when to mind her own business. Sarah."
Maria said quietly, never taking her eyes off the attacker. "I need you to listen very carefully."
"When I count to 3, you're going to hit that alarm button and then get behind the desk. Do you understand?" The nurse nodded, almost imperceptibly. Maria could see her gathering courage, preparing to move, but the man saw it too. Nobody's counting to anything, he snarled, lunging toward Sarah with the knife raised. Maria didn't think. After 15 years of reacting to crisis, of making split-second decisions that kept her family fed and safe, her body moved before her mind could catch up. She squeezed the trigger. The rifle fired with a sound that seemed to shake the entire building. Maria had never heard anything so loud in an enclosed space, and the recoil nearly knocked her off her feet. The bullet went wide, shattering a computer monitor and sending sparks flying. But the shock of the gunshot was enough to stop the man's charge. He spun around to face Maria, his eyes wide with surprise and rage. "You crazy bitch," he screamed. "You don't know what you just did." But Maria did know what she had done. She had announced to the entire hospital that something was wrong. The gunshot would bring people running, would trigger lockdown protocols, would alert the other attackers that their plan had been compromised.